And we are live. Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today here. It's another live here on the Seattle Data Guy channel. With us today, we have Bobby. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
Hopefully,
Thank you for having me.
yeah. Hopefully you're doing well.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Doing
Thanks.
well. Doing well. Great. So obviously, we're going to talk a lot about today data, leading data teams, kind of how to just be kind of an impactful manager. Also talking a little bit about going from kind of an analytics engineer to a manager. I saw that kind of happened, and I think that's always an interesting discussion because it feels like this gap that doesn't get discussed that often. Where it's like, well, how do I make this jump from writing queries and code to leading people. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before going into that, I'd love to learn more about you and so would everyone else. So we'll ask a little bit about kind of your background in data. But before we ask about your background in data, I like kind of asking people what they do outside of data because it seems to be all encompassing for most of us. So what do you do
Sure.
when you're not working?
Yeah, I mean, mainly spending time with my beautiful wife and kids. I've got a 8-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son, and my daughter's involved in everything sports so far, and I'm sure my son will be joining that path here pretty soon. But usually outside of this, you find me coaching one of my daughter's teams or supporting her. But I mean, if I'm around the house, I love to grill, smoke meats like brisket or whatever else. Just hosting people. Like if I actually have some free time, maybe you'll find me on the golf course or at some concerts. But a lot of it just with the young family, just staying busy there. So.
Yeah, you're very. It sounds very Texan when you say smoke
Yeah.
brisket. So nice.
Well, and I guess on top of that too, I do host the Energy Bites podcast.
That's right. Yes, that's right. I've seen that.
Digital
I've seen
Wildlife
shows
Better.
on it.
So shameless plug. If you're interested in the intersection of tech and data and in the energy industry. So
Yeah. Actually, I feel like I do know at least a few people, if not energy utility. So somewhere in that space, I'll have to at least send them the Energy Bites podcast.
yeah, 100%.
So talking about data, how did you get into data? Because I feel like everyone has a different story.
Oh yeah, no, we find that in the podcast too because we kind of start there, and it's like there's no right path or one path to getting in there. But yeah, so I I graduated with a math degree, so I had that going for me, just kind of pure math. But both my parents are teachers, so I kind of went down the path of wanting to, be a teacher and a coach. I played baseball through college, and it was like, it was a life I knew, and wasn't so bad. You had summers off, so I was a teacher and a coach for about 5 years. I taught algebra all the way up through pre-calc. Probably would have been the calculus teacher the next year had I stayed. But I was, I coached some summer baseball teams on top of, coaching high school teams. And one of the dads worked at ConocoPhillips, and we got to talking. And he realized because when I started off in college, I actually started kind of on a maritime engineering track. So he knew I had some engineering basics background and the math degree. And he's like, oh, well, there's this kind of position in oil and gas called a reservoir tech, which you work with the reservoir petroleum engineers and help support their workflows and everything. He's like, we're having really good luck with math degree people. Why don't you take a look at it and see if it's something you like? And I was like, sure. I don't know anything about oil and gas, but why not? So I shadowed someone. I was like, yeah, I can do that. And obviously paid a lot better than teaching did. So I was like, let me give this a shot. I can always go back to teaching if it's not something I like or want to do. So yeah, I got in at ConocoPhillips as the reservoir tech, and when I got there, they're like, "You're going to be the Spotfire guy." So I don't know how many people listening are familiar with TIBCO Spotfire, but it's similar to Tableau or Power BI. Personally, I think it's kind of those things on steroids. Really allows a lot of really good integration with R and Python, where you can write data functions within it and so on. But a ton of people in oil and gas use it, still to this day. It's really, really popular in that industry. So that was kind of my gateway drug into data. And that was 2014. So, I mean, we're almost exactly, literally probably exactly like 10 years, in the industry. So, basically, I started reverse engineering a ton of projects. I was working with an engineer like, hey, these people did this. Can you figure this out? And kind of my elevator pitch, like I walked in the door, I had no business getting that job other than probably a connection, and I interviewed well, but I didn't know what a VLOOKUP was in Excel, the first week on the job. But it was like, all right, well, let's figure this out. but just really started getting into the data there. And had to learn the industry and learn data at the same time. And was lucky enough. It was before oil prices crashed in 2014, so they sent me to some petroleum engineering courses just so I could get up to speed there, and then also like Spotfire and some other kind of data trainings, and just again I immersed myself, and I started to realize that was right around the whole Time magazine data science is the sexiest job of the 21st century and all that stuff. So I was like, man, maybe this is something I should really lean into. So really kind of got myself going there and became kind of the Spotfire guy as they wanted me to. And I was building out a bunch of BI tools and dashboards and stuff for the engineers to use, and started automating some processes that they were all doing. I was like, well, we can do that with code, or at least with within the BI tool, and we can process that data in minutes or within a day, or rather than you guys spending weeks having to pull this from multiple sources and put it all together. So that's I guess we can probably stop there. I mean, it goes further than that, but that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I like that you again came from the teacher route. From there, had a math background, and were able to kind of dovetail that into kind of more of this engineering space and data space. I would say that it's always interesting seeing like math people do. I think this is one of the challenges with the degrees. You have to find a practical use for it.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who went the CS route because it's like, well, I have math, and I then just put some programming on top of that, and became kind of a CS person.
For sure, yeah. I mean, looking back, I would absolutely would have done more computer science or more of an applied math type thing, or a statistics degree. But again, my goal was to be a teacher, so I just did this pure math. But I think one thing I kind of realized too. With that came a lot of like doing proofs. So it was kind of like, all right, prove this in geometry, prove this in calculus. So I wrote way more proofs than I ever want to do again. But I think it taught me how to think and how to problem solve, because there's a lot of different ways to prove. You can do direct proofs, but you can also prove by induction or by contradiction. And so there's different ways to think about maybe working backwards on the problem, or how you frame questions. I think it taught me how to think and how to solve problems. So I look back and I think it was a benefit. But again, if you think about it more practically, I was like, yeah, I would have done stats or computer science or something like that, knowing what I know now.
Yeah, but like you kind of said, like part of college, I think, is learning how to think, and also just learning in general, right? So I don't think it has to be strictly practical all the time. Although there are some degrees that you probably have a hard time getting jobs, but math is luckily, I don't think, one of them.
No, it's pretty flexible.
On the flip side, so one of the things I like that you've done in your background is you've worked in a lot of real industries.
Right.
That is to say, there's a lot of like digital analytics on what's happening on the web and happening in the world, but you've worked in reality, right? Like what's happening in the world, a lot of physical stuff. So how does that change in terms of like analytics? What's kind of different there?
I think and I think I posted, I kind of reposted something and coded on, I think sometimes in oil and gas or in these commodities, we think we have big data, or even fast data. And again, I think those are relative terms, but I think relative to, marketing analytics and stuff where you have clickstream data and you have, Google Analytics. That stuff just piles up so quickly. So, we're not dealing with like maybe necessarily the terabytes or petabytes of data that people are using, but again, it's still, it's the whole doesn't fit in Excel. It doesn't, it may not, SQL Server may not be the right tool for every job. So, I think there's some of that, but I think too, I don't want people to come after me for this, but I think maybe, in general, we have some like less data savvy people or companies, whereas I think like, especially the marketing side, I feel like some people have been entrenched again with Google Analytics and they've been using that data for a long time. Whereas like we still have a lot of people using Excel or, more rudimentary tools. That's not to say we've got a lot of engineers who love to get their hands dirty on the data. And it's probably pretty similar. But with that, I think there's also some more low hanging fruit. I think I think there's probably a lot more like SaaS products already even built for analyzing your Salesforce data or your clickstream data and so on. Whereas like there's not as much infrastructure or SaaS type stuff built around oil and gas. So I think there's more, again, low-hanging fruit where you can make an impact, and really just by applying good data organization techniques and having just a coherent data plan, it puts you in the top probably 25% of say oil and gas companies. And then, I mean, I think we were talking about a little bit before we jumped on, and I kind of added it, was I think, commodity prices having an impact on things as well, like where and when investment goes into those things. I mean, again, oil and gas is extremely cyclical with like the pricing and everything. So when prices go down, actually, you find a lot more people start trying to do more with data because they want to do more with less. And then when things are, just blowing and going, people are like, oh, it's in a PDF, it's in Excel, I don't care, we're making money. So I think you have to kind of balance that and know where you fit in the organization. That like and maybe it's true in a lot of places, but like the data is not necessarily where the value is. I mean, the value of our company is getting, oil and natural gas out of the ground. We're something that augments it, help, and should be helping, enhance that, but it's not our core business. Whereas maybe the dark marketing, or the, I guess it's one of the atoms versus electrons kind of things, right? Whereas like a lot of the stuff that you guys work a lot with, it's more digitally created data. So it's just all kind of like this cycle where, like you said, ours actually goes back out to physical models. And some of it is implementing physical models too. Like, how do we take, this physical model from this, this paper, this academic paper that was written, and how do we, feed that in or work that into our workflow? So it's definitely a really cool space. And I think one last thing I had on there, and I think is a big thing, is I think there's like larger physical risk. I think we look at it like, oh, oil and gas, we're so far behind, Silicon Valley and all these things. Well, again, this is kind of an old analogy at this point, but it's like, if Spotify gets my song recommendation wrong, I just click next, and then I'm training their model again. And it's, so there's really low stakes in general, other than like, if the model sucks too bad, it's like, well, I'll go to Pandora. But, for us, like, yeah, AI, ML, all this automation stuff, even based off of that, is great. But if a well blows out, I mean, we're talking, human lives at risk. We're talking, millions, potentially billions of dollars. So, I mean, like, I think, the risk level associated with adopting some of that technology in certain parts of the business is a lot higher. So I think that's why sometimes it's a lot slower to move. So it's kind of where I kind of prefer more of an augmented intelligence. Like, let's use those things, but let's make recommendations. But you still need to have the human element, where it can't just be this self-driving thing at this point, at least.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of kind of adding into that, where there's just more risk, right? Like digital, okay, you get the wrong whatever product recommended to you as an ad. I mean, Amazon was doing that forever. You bought a product, and then Amazon would just recommend the same product to you. I think it was back when they had a pretty good connection with Facebook, and it'd just be like, you go to Facebook, and you're like, I literally just bought this product. Like, why are you recommending me the exact same product? And then they trained it, and I don't know, supposedly it's better now. But yeah, the cost is very, very, very different. Oh, the other thought I had while you were talking, just because you said there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, does that ever make you think like, oh, I could build something to sell to oil and gas? Just because like you hear low-hanging fruit, like, could I build something on top of that?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's definitely something I've thought about. Like, even if there's even some kind of, like, I would call like a micro SaaS, but like there's obviously certain things that probably I've built an internal tool to do, and I'm using again, Spotfire or some Python or whatever, and again, it works. But like, this is probably something that most companies need. So yeah, I think definitely there's processes that could be productized, and yeah, it could be sold to a broader audience within oil and gas as well.
Yeah, be interesting to see.
Probably plenty of, I know for a fact, plenty of companies have spun off of that, in general, anyways. So
yes, yeah, no. So just kind of digging into kind of the topic for today, because I think we've got a pretty good background on you. So one of the things I noticed is that you shifted from being a senior analytics engineer to being the manager or analytics manager
sure.
At your current company. What were kind of some of the biggest challenges as you made that shift?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of one of those weird things, because even when I came in as a senior analytics engineer, I kind of had almost like an architect kind of level thing. I helped design the stack that we were going to use, and I had a lot of say in how we were doing things, even though I was, labeled a senior analytics engineer. But I didn't have people reporting to me. So I mean, I could kind of help influence what we were doing, but I wasn't people's boss. So I think that was the biggest thing, is that going from being more purely an individual contributor, and then having to manage people. And like, again, I think the biggest thing there is like, people have their own lives, they have their own personalities, anxieties, and whatever. And like now that's for you to work with and manage, and understand like what makes this person tick and how can I get the most out of them. But also, again, kind of taking your hands off the reins a little bit and being able to say like, no, this isn't for me to do now. Like I need to train this person up on this process that maybe I was doing before, or this data source that I was working with. Like I need to be able to hand that off. So I think it's having to understand what makes the people you're managing tick, but then also like understanding where their skill sets lie and where can they best be utilized as well to help your team, but also the business. But then like, even again, like we're a smaller company, so the technical work never fully went away. So then it's like, all right, I've got these things that I'm responsible for getting done. It's not like all of a sudden my hands are off the keyboard. I've still got your responsibilities to build things out. So I think you have to be very intentional about setting aside time to make sure you're keeping up with like your direct reports, because it could be very easy just you've been there, like you start coding something, you start working on something, you get blinders on, you're like, I don't want to not stop focusing on that. But you've got to carve out time. I think we do like bi-weekly one-on-one meetings with, I did that with my direct reports, because you've got to stay in touch with them, on an individual level, not just on a team level. So I think that was the biggest thing. And then also just prioritization. I think before that, like, it was my boss's job to really help prioritize and steer the direction. And then it kind of became more incumbent on me to lead that. So then, I think having to engage a lot more with leaders across the business and understanding, what does the business actually need, and then helping our team understand that. And then, I think there's always this push and pull of, here's what the business needs, but there's a bunch of squeaky wheels asking for some grease too. And and there's people, kind of on the ground floor that they have things, they're like, hey, can I do this to help automate this process or make it better? And there's absolutely some of those things that we want to do, but do those align with like the greater purpose of the company? So I think just having to balance all that then on top of individual contributor work, I think probably is the biggest hurdle to overcome.
Yeah. So wait, are you saying you still have to do a little bit of individual contributor work in there every once in a while? It sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, and again, we did a good bit of hiring early this year. So again, it was, and I think even hiring is a whole nother thing, especially when you're going through that. It's a whole nother, time sink, and it's one of the things you don't want to get wrong. You want to have, the right people. And then once they finally come on board, then you have to get them up to speed. So and I'm much less than I was, say, even let's say 6 months ago. But yeah, I mean, there's still certain things where I especially say on the Snowflake side, I had built out some stuff with Snowpipe, and I'm kind of the person that understands that. So when those things come up, I've kind of handled that. But a lot of the more downstream stuff, say within on our transformation layer and like building out dashboards, I have really tried to get my hands off of that stuff as much as possible.
Yeah, no, that is generally the goal. I think one thing I read somewhere about leading is you don't want to be the hero, right? Oftentimes the people that get promoted are people who are technically very savvy, which then makes it hard to let go of those technical things that maybe you solved. And so you want to keep being the person that solves the problem.
For sure.
But you gotta eventually start being like, no, that's not my job currently anymore, at least not to the same extent.
Yeah. And I think it's something too is like, I mean, you've got a vision for how you want things to go, and you need, I think that you have to find like what certain things are non-negotiable. Like, this is how I want things done. But at the same time, you have to, kind of, again, pull yourself back and say like, no, the way that they solve this problem is fine. And it's maybe it's not how I would have done it, but it's a totally, and sometimes it's better than what I would have, or I'd say sometimes, maybe oftentimes better than what I would have done. But like, I think you get blinders like, well, this is how I want it done. And you have to really pull yourself back. Like, no, you have to let people be professionals and do things the way that they see fit. But, again, it has to fit into an overall maybe framework or structure that you want. So I think there's certain things that I think it was I don't know if you ever read the book by Danny Meyer. He's like the restaurateur behind like Shake Shack and everything, but I think it's called Setting the Table. But he talks about like, if I want the salt shaker right in the middle, there's gonna be people always trying to nudge it off the middle, but you always have to keep nudging it back. So like, I think there's certain things like this is the way I want it. You got to make sure that it fits within that, but at the same time, like give people freedom to solve problems and do it the way that they see fit as well. So
yeah, in that, because when you're talking about hiring, one of the ways I've found is very important to ensure people kind of understand where the walls are, right? Like you said, like you want to give people freedom, but at the same time there are edges somewhere that you want to make sure that they're clear. Do you have you set up like clear onboarding so people kind of get like how things should be, like in terms of like standards and things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, pretty well. I mean, it's not perfect. So we're just being upfront. We use like kind of like the modern data stack. It was that was something I brought to. We can talk about that more later. That I don't think many people have been using in oil and gas, but like with DBT, I think it's been really beneficial. You got the documentation and everything, so that's been really beneficial to like kind of get people onboarded. I've been able to kind of, but I was able to create a pretty good onboarding workflow where like this is how data flows through the organization. This is this is DBT, but like again, I think DBT puts a good framework around. Again, there's a file structure. This is how we organize files within here. This is this is how you write. There's a style format. This is how we write SQL within GME. So yeah, I think that really helped with the onboarding was to and then just for people to have that DBT documentation like the website where like as soon as you walk in, like you can look at any model, you can go to a dashboard and you can say, all right, well, it's using this table and I can follow the lineage all the way back. I think it really helped, has made that onboarding process a lot easier rather than like, oh, here, there's this stored procedure buried in here somewhere. And, good luck figuring out how to unravel all this. I think people have been able to spin up relatively quickly with that. And then again, I think with DBT, again, like I think it's made hiring a little bit easier because people don't have to know Python necessarily. Most of the people we hire do, but as long as you know SQL, you can swim and you can be a contributor on the team relatively quickly. So,
yeah, no, I that is one of the benefits of some of these tools that kind of do some of the documentation as you go along.
Yeah, and it's self-documenting in a way. I mean, like we could always be more intentional about actually putting the documentation in there as far as like column level stuff and so on. But even just having that table level lineage, I think is a huge advantage, and it's made it explorable and has really shortened that onboarding. What do you want to call it? I mean, like timeline or just that overall knowledge transfer.
Yeah. Going back to like kind of like skills of a manager, we talked about some of the challenges, but like what would you define as some of the skills that you've needed to pick up to become a successful manager, and how can people practice them?
I mean, I think one that I've always been trying to hone, even going back say to my coaching days, has been like leadership skills. I don't know. It's one of those. I think it's a chicken and the egg thing. Some people think you're born with leadership skills or not, but I truly think they can be developed, and I think it comes with confidence and time. But I mean, I do try to read a good bit of or I read quote unquote listen to audiobooks, I could say on my commute and so on. But really try to again, there's always gaps on that side as far as whether it's how you communicate with people or putting like goal setting frameworks in place or even just like providing recognition to your team. So I mean, I think one framework is probably not new to a lot of people here, but that I've always kind of enjoyed is the OKR framework. But even going deeper on that, I forget what the book is, but I think Lady Christina Wadkey, she wrote the book. It's an OKR book, but I mean, I think we've implemented some stuff around like a weekly like wins meeting where we celebrate the wins and kind of come together as a team. So yeah, I just think again, communication skills are super important. And again, I think there's always, whether it's reading or even just getting out and like just interacting with other leaders and seeing what you like about how they do things, and or what you don't like, and like how you want to implement that in your team and create your own like little subculture on your team. Is really important. As far as some other stuff, I mean, as far as like being like, you don't have to be the most technical person on the team. I mean, I think I am fairly technical, for a data manager, at least relative to people on my team. But like, I don't think that's like a prerequisite. I mean, I think as long as you understand, what tools and languages are out there and what they're used for and what they're best used for, that you can speak with your team and other people in a meaningful way about them. I think that's the most important. And ultimately, I think it just really comes down to knowing the business. Whether it's the kind of the fundamentals of the business you're in, like say in oil and gas, like do you understand at a high level what the engineers are doing, the geologists, even on the accounting side and so on, and can you translate that back and forth between the technical and less technical people. But then also understanding like what are the goals of the business and like how are we enabling those. I think a framework that I didn't really get to implement here, but I really like, and I think it kind of sometimes happens organically, is like it's kind of like the metric trees approach, where again, like, all right, well, if free cash flow is important to us, then well, this breaks into these two parts, and then again, this breaks down, and you can really see how all those things align up to the business. But if you don't understand what that North Star is for the business, it's really hard to prioritize and make sure your team's working on the things that really are moving the needle for the company.
Yeah, no, I really like thinking about those things that really are the goal of the company. I'm in my current writing, I recently referenced the whole like 5 whys thing, and then I was going to I started with like a restaurant that wants to do more turns in a night, right? Like wants to flip its tables more often. And it's like, well, why does it want to do that? Like, and like, just kind of going back down behind that, because that all just like, that's one of the few levers you have, especially if fine dining. Like, well, if you can't increase your average bill price, maybe you can seat more people in an evening, or maybe you can increase seats. But there's only so many things you can do to get, again, a larger income at the end of the night. So, how can you change those levers that you do have control of? I really do. I think it's always important to understanding what levers you have power over and which ones you just don't sometimes. You kind of have to go with that.
Yeah, like for us, like we can't control oil price. So like, I mean, revenue, you can do everything right, and your revenue can go to crap just because now all of a sudden oil was 80, now it's 40. You're making half the money for the same, the same, everything else the same, and you're making half as much money. So.
Yes, yeah, I've read a little bit of Paul J. Getty's stuff. Who I don't know. Do you know Paul J. Getty by chance?
I know the name.
Yeah. Back in, so if you know Getty Images, before it was Getty Images, he like in the 1920s was as you guys call it, was a wildcatter.
That's right.
Owned a lot of oil and gas, and he talks a lot about how and then we got screwed over by oil price, and then we had to do this to try to make things work. And very, very interesting when you think 1920s, they were somehow finding just gas and oil with no real technology. But
yeah, no, that part is insane, because we have everything. I mean, because that's one thing I think, going back to your previous question about working in a real industry. I mean, I think we may lag behind, say, on the data or that side, but I mean, as far as physical technology, it's insane what they've been able to do and what we're able to do. I mean, we're drilling miles into the earth and over miles, and we're landing a drill bit in tens of feet of pay, across what we're talking 20,000 feet of pipe. It's just it's wild. And then all the seismic and all the different processing. Especially then you get offshore, and then they're doing it underneath thousands, miles of deep of water. It's pretty wild.
No, it's again, I talked to Jessica, and she did her talk at our summit we did last year, and her talk's fascinating because it just feels so tactile. It feels so tangible. You're like, oh, I can really this is really cool. It feels very real.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know. Well, she'll hate me for this, but she's the water hammer girl, is what she's been known for, because there's part of a paper where they did that. But I mean, again, that was taking the pressure signatures at the end of a frac stage, and being able to do stuff with it, and it became a pretty big deal. But again, like taking that physical world data, and then being able to digitize it and then apply some of these more modern data techniques on top is pretty powerful.
Yeah. So obviously there's a ton going on, both in the oil and gas industry, but just in general, right? When you're working with the business, they've got their own language, we have our own language, and it's often said, and I think you also referenced that, like, communication is really important, and I do view it as an important skill for data people. But I feel like that's sometimes where we stop. We say, like, communication is important, and then we don't actually communicate what is important about communication skills. So do you have any examples where you've communicated something to the business that required you to, like, simplify something that was more technical, or help them kind of get on the same page with what you were doing?
Yeah. So I mean, I think a good example, really from the kind of beginning of this year. So we have a corporate financial model, right? And like basically they ask for budget assumptions from like every side of the business that feed into that model. But one thing I think we weren't doing an awesome job of was tracking how are we doing against those assumptions, because I mean those assumptions are ultimately what that group said were important, to our success and meeting our budget, or our goals. So there was a big push to get those assumptions, say into our data warehouse, but into the financial model in a consistent way, but without disrupting the business too much as well. So like there was a certain format that they had provided the data in, and where it made sense, we wanted them to keep it that way. But basically what we said, all right, well, you can provide your data however you've been providing. It needs to be consistent. But then from there on, I suggested, like, let's, so really what I was suggesting was I wanted them to put the data into like third normal form, or that kind of tidy data, more of a, but and I made the mistake of saying third normal form once, and I think everyone's eyeballs rolled back in their head. But I was like, all right, let's step back. We want it to be, tall and skinny data. I mean, like, but again, most people's brains don't think that way. They don't want to. It wouldn't be good for an import sheet. It's not how an engineer or an accountant's brain thinks, as far as in like kind of that tall and skinny format.
Yeah.
But I kind of explained to them the virtues of, like, look, if we're able to actually submit the data, in this way, it's a lot easier to work with. And then if those assumptions change, or when they change, next year, if we want to add or take away, some parameters, it's gonna be a lot easier just to add rows and keep it in the same schema than having to go add multiple columns to that. So I think by getting them on board of, like, all right, if we can work to have some kind of little Power Query or something in this Excel sheet, or however you're providing it, that puts the data into that tall and skinny format. And it worked really well, and we were able to create a really nice process to kind of load all that data. And then from there, as like whether it's into Snowflake or some SQL warehouse, it's relatively simple from that point to pivot the data out, or to do it within a tool downstream. But I think it was important to kind of get people on board with that data modeling technique, because otherwise it was going to be a bear for our team to manage 8 different sheets coming in all these different formats. So
yeah. I love that you also referenced the fact that you did say third normal form, and most people did exactly what you'd assume they do if they're not data people. They could even be technical people, right? And they're still going to look at you like, what are you talking about? You're talking to engineers who are very smart, you're talking to accountants who are very smart, but they're still going to be like, I have no idea what you just asked me to do. I think that is the interesting tendency, because we're used to communicating with other ICs at our that do the same thing, and so we talk in that language, and then we have to have those realizations where we're like, oh, we're not talking to someone that knows what I'm talking about. We have to talk to someone who has no bearing whatsoever in most of what we're referencing. Maybe they've got some high level pictures of kind of some, maybe they know kind of what a data warehouse does functionally, but they don't know the details. And so you have to kind of talk the way one person I've talked to says, like, you have to talk functionally. It's to be like, okay, what does this functionally do that they can understand? So I know I like that. Cool. Just kind of digging into that, or digging into more of kind of your experience. Are there projects you feel like you've delivered that you think others could learn from, and kind of what were some of the takeaways?
I mean, let's just talk about maybe like this the SCADA, getting like SCADA data into our system, because I think there was a few sides of that where I had some learnings. Because I think there's a downstream application once we finally got the data in there that was important. But So we had so if people aren't aware, SCADA data is kind of like really IoT type data coming from the field. It's like industrial, controls type stuff. So we have, data down like the resolution, maybe like every 10 or 15 minutes, we're getting, all different kind of pressures, temperatures, rates, all, you name it, like there's, all kind of data coming out of there. So it's probably one of, if not the biggest data sources we have, but we didn't have that data coming into Snowflake yet. So we were, we have a company that we contract with for for SCADA, and they had already written like some connectors for SQL Server, but they hadn't written one for Snowflake yet. And so I was working with them to kind of get that moved over, and the developer was not. He was still trying to do things in a very SQL Server kind of way, and I guess maybe going back to what we talked about earlier, the first go around, I really didn't push hard enough on what I knew was not going to be the right way to do it for Snowflake, because it's just not as transactional. It's not a transactional database like SQL Server is. So smaller inserts and everything is just not as going to be as performant in that way. So I think I have to do more batch uploads. So I really didn't push, and he got to a working solution, and the data was going in, but it ended up being like the most expensive warehouse in our Snowflake, because it was just running all the time, and it was just was not efficient at all. So spending money on development, and I kind of told him like, look, this is how I think it should be done, but he's like, no, I think this will work. And so I didn't really hold my ground enough, and it got to a point where like, man, this is going to be untenable. The cost. Like, here's what I was suggesting, and I think we moved to more to using Snowpipe. Then I had to pay for more development to get the data like written out to an Azure blob. So I think ultimately we've delivered on that, and I think with that we've realized like actual gains. So I mean, speaking of a downstream application, within a month or two of doing that, and there's something I'll talk about later, but we've kind of implemented these office hour type times, once every 2 weeks for people to kind of come and ask questions. But so one of our field level technicians, who I didn't ever talk to, they were up in North Dakota, they jumped on and like, man, if we could just see this data sooner, because like they were getting it on a daily basis from another system, and even that had like a day or two lag. Like if we could just see these pressures, sooner, and if it could flag these things, we could remediate wells that are having issues that are, plugging up, and that would save us $80,000, every time that we need to, if we can get ahead of it, we don't have to shut the well in and replace this one piece that costs $80,000. We could just go do a really cheap, remediation and keep the well online. So, I guess as soon as we got that data over and we're doing it, and wasn't cost prohibitive on the Snowflake side, I mean, I think we're able to save even just that. I mean, we're talking about saving 80 grand, and then they end up doing it over, it's been 15 or 20 wells at this point. I mean, this is a non-trivial amount of money.
Yeah.
way more money than what, even like Snowflake or any of our data stack costs. But that doesn't even take into account like lost production, which is probably an even higher cost. If your well's producing, 100 barrels a day at, $80 a barrel, you do the math. I mean, that stacks up pretty quick if you have to shut it in and you're not producing that. But I think that was a big project where like I learned a lot of even on the project management side, that like you've got to hold your ground, and you've got to understand what if you got to trust your gut and know the right way to do things, and again hold, even if it's a contractor or someone that you're paying to do things, that you've got to hold them to what you want ultimately out of it. But then being able to deliver downstream for people and making sure that investment is worth it is important.
Yeah. I love that there's that tangible, again, cost that you can kind of really point to. And it's one of those things that probably makes your Snowflake costs look non-important. Like, it's like, okay, so we spent whatever it was on Snowflake, but we're saving, this amount. So even that one project becomes.
Yeah. And to be clear, I mean, like our Snowflake, I mean, at least from people I talk to, we keep it very reasonable. I mean, honestly, we're paying more and then maybe this is a whole nother discussion, and I think I've seen people talk about it, but we're spending a lot more on data ingestion than we are on Snowflake itself. And
Yeah, no, I don't know what tool you're using, but I definitely see that a lot, and definitely work to help a lot of companies kind of reduce their ingestion because of that. Because there's a lot of tools that get very expensive out there, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot. Again, I don't know if you're custom or out of the box, but there's a lot of out of the box solutions that very quickly somehow like get more expensive than Snowflake, and you're like, why is this more expensive than Snowflake?
Yeah, no, that was the biggest shock.
Um,
I mean, no, if I'm being honest, I mean, like we use Fivetran, um, and we can talk about that decision probably a little further down because I think it comes back to like the how I stay on top of trends and kind of how it led to some different outcomes. But I mean, yeah, I mean Fivetran. But I knew it when we started with it. Fivetran's expensive, but at the same time, I couldn't get anyone's. I guess we can jump into that. Not, so I think I think one way you want to go with this is how have I stayed up with the latest trends and technologies, and I think like Twitter and LinkedIn have been probably the ways I've really stayed on top of it the most, and just finding the right people and curating some of that. But I've done a good bit of crowdsourcing too, and like we were going through that kind of process early on of like, right, what warehouse should we use and what should we be using, and we were looking at to be clear, Fivetran, Stitch, Matillion, some of these different folks. And I tried to get someone to say a bad thing about Fivetran, and the only thing they could say was it was expensive. But outside of that, I mean, like as far as like reliability and service and all this stuff, I mean, everyone's like it's been top notch, and it's been my experience. I mean, it's just the only thing is you get to a point, and it's like, wow, this is this is expensive, and like, is it necessary? But it's it's a push pull of like timing too. I mean, I think a big thing there when we were making that decision was we needed to get up and running fast. Like when I came in, they were already 3 or 4 months into operating the asset, and they had purchased it back for 9 months previous to that. So they wanted to stand up a data warehouse, and they wanted to get things going. Like, how can we get this going fast and reliably? And it was kind of and at the time I was the data team. And then we pulled over a lady, Michelle, who's on my team. She was already in the business, but I pulled her onto my team. So it was 2 of us, but 2 people serving out, to a whole company. There's a lot to do. And I was like, do you want me babysitting pipelines, or would you rather me be working downstream of that and adding value, which is just more tangible value? Because I mean, there's not really value in moving data, from a system to the warehouse. The value is downstream of that.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Sometimes I'm surprised at how much we still spend on ingestion, just because it feels like a problem that should be cheaper. But no, there's a lot of data. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But there's a lot of ways to justify anything in life. But I mean, like, well, it's definitely way cheaper than a data engineer. Yeah, I mean, so there's that. But it depends how you want to frame it, and probably your even confirmation bias. But
yeah, I love it. So just diving a little more into like the how do you stay up with technologies and trends? You're trying to do so much. You're trying to balance running a team, probably doing some IC work. Kind of where do you try to get all this information from?
Yeah, I mean, again, social media is probably the biggest thing. I mean, because ultimately those end up linking me on to whether it's a Medium blog or a video or something else that maybe adds more context. But I mean, I'd say Twitter not as much anymore. I mean, I think it was maybe 2001, 2002. I mean, I think there was a really vibrant community, and I think maybe since it became X and Elon took over, I know a lot of the more technical people jumped off, and some of them were on Mastodon for however long that lasted. But it just seems like, I mean, there's still some data conversations going on there, but not nearly as much. But I think a lot of it has shifted over to LinkedIn. But I think it's really like curating the people that you follow and people that you align with your kind of vision of how data should be done. But really, I just try to stay abreast there. And I mean, a lot of those clue me into new technology, and then I go investigate. All right, what is this thing? I mean, I think the other day, again, speaking about the ingestion side, I think I saw, is it Pedram Navid, but I mean, it works at Dagster, and they've got this new thing, Sling, or their DLT, data load tool. I'm like, well, maybe that's something that could help me on the data ingestion side. Or TJ Murphy's got, I think Titan, where it's like a Snowflake, almost a Terraform for Snowflake type thing. And I just saw yesterday he's got this whole export thing that will export all of your you point at your Snowflake and it exports everything out into like a YAML file, like as a config, so you don't have to go find all that stuff. So I think just once you kind of find the right people to follow, a lot of that information just kind of ends up, on as you scroll. And I think there's a lot of value to extract out of there.
Yeah, no, I think that all those places make sense. And then I think you may have not referenced it 'cause I didn't hear it, but you also talked about office hours as well as kind of like your podcast, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think my podcast has been really beneficial in staying up to speed. So I mean, I think we're about 40 plus episodes in. So I mean, I've now talked to 40 plus people or companies about what they're using to solve problems in the industry, and being able to grok more about how are people using AI, because I think AI is one, it comes up every single episode, but it's like how are people actually using it? Not, I don't want to hear how some companies selling it or what they're selling it that it does, but how are people actually using it, and how can I think about how to use it? And I've definitely had a handful of people on there to add more color to something. Again, I got, like you said, been really busy running a team, and we've been focused a lot on kind of data fundamentals of like data modeling and even more descriptive analytics. Like I haven't had the bandwidth or the time to even mess with it as much as I would love to. I mean, I'm a technical person, I would love to do it, but it's just, there's only so much time in a day. So I think just talking to a bunch of really smart people that are solving problems in our industry has been really beneficial to stay on top of what, different technology trends are out there. But yeah, like you were saying, and I mentioned it earlier, but even just talking to another guy, he did this consulting, but he talked about how he offered like office hours to the company he was working with, and just kind of open forum for people to come in, and that's been really beneficial here at GME as well. We've kind of implemented it, and every other week we make ourselves available for like 2 hours. My team does, and we sit in one of the conference rooms, and you can come talk to us or you can call in. But if you want to learn how to do something in Python, let me know. If you want to know where to find this data, but just trying to create more channels for people within the business to ask questions and to understand data and to make them more literate, because it's been a really positive thing, which is not something I necessarily thought about until again you start rubbing shoulders with other smart people. So
yeah, no, I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, I also have this kind of conversation. It's great to like talk to other people. The data world and tech world is so big that like you can't grasp all of it, and so it's good to like kind of see what other people see the other edges people focus on. It's the whole elephant. Everyone's trying to just figure out what's going on, and you kind of need to get as many perspectives as possible to kind of understand. So no, I think all of that's great. In terms of like, actually, I might go to this question first. Like, do you think there's any terms in the data world that you find that are unnecessary?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this a little bit, and again, maybe some of them I don't understand enough. But like, I think like there's certain things that I've got a decent, bullshit meter, or whatever you can call it. And like, I see certain things like, yeah, that makes sense to me. And other things I'm like, man, is that just repurposed? So I mean, like, so you got like data mesh, and I mean, maybe it is a good framework. I don't know. Like, as soon as I heard it, I just felt like it was like, I feel like this is something that's just kind of made up or already exists. We're creating a new name for it. I mean, again, like self-service BI or kind of distributed. I mean, I almost think it's some of what we've already organized our company. Where we've got data people that actually work in each functional group, but then like I've got a central data team that really helps enable some of that. But like we've got an analyst in kind of each group that's doing those things. But I think we don't call it data mesh. I think people are always trying to create a name for something to capitalize on it. Even like data contracts, it's like I think there's probably a good framework around it. But it's like, is that something different than what's been going on in probably a lot of companies for years? Like it already existed, you just gave it a name. So I feel like a couple of those, and I'd like to get your opinion, on those two as well, because maybe I'm not thinking about them in the right way. But I just feel like there's people create names for things that already exist, and they don't. I think just trying to capitalize off of. I mean, I think the one thing I always see with data or tech is like everything old is new again, kind of thing. So
yeah, I think that paper just came out. Like what goes around comes around, or goes around and goes around. I don't know what the title is. But yeah, there's like this constant looping in tech, and I mean you're definitely right. Like that's, you can argue that it's bad. You can also realize it's what these companies, if you're a vendor, you should do. right? Like it's like, yeah, you should try to name something and then really tie your product to it. I just put out an article. I don't know if it was yesterday. I think it was 2 days ago. I think it was Tuesday, called Vendor Driven Design.
Yeah.
Where like almost most of what we do has been driven by vendors to some degree or another, right? I reference like TSQL and PLSQL, which are Oracle and SQL standards,
Yeah.
right? So they very much push both SQL but also their own standards of it. We have data lakes that were heavily pushed by Hortonworks and Cloudera when everyone was like, let's do data lakes, right? Like schema on read was something I heard everywhere. And I was like, just coming to the industry, I was like, this is really important, right? Like schema on read. It sounds like super, super interesting. And then you're like, well, you're really just writing queries and defining like, yeah, okay.
Yes, where are you doing?
And there's pros and cons to it, and you need to understand if it's valuable. So it's usually a combination of like they see something that's already happening and kind of try to add their product to it, and then really try to put a lot of money and marketing behind it and make it seem maybe more important than it is sometimes. Like sometimes if they're smart, I think they'll understand that they should figure out where it fits and then try to fit it in there and do really well to meet that need. But I think sometimes they try to make it meet all needs, and that's when it eventually starts losing value.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And then I threw Kubernetes in there too, just because I think it's an old trope anyways, but it's just most people that think they need Kubernetes don't.
I was just watching. I don't know if you've ever watched the Primogen. He's a YouTuber. Actually Twitch, and then I just watch him on YouTube, watch his clips on YouTube. But I think he just recently put out something. I'm trying to remember what it was called, where it was like the engineering principle was basically like just simplify everything. Like you don't need these like 30 layer things, and we as engineers like to make things complex that sometimes don't need it. There's a place, right? Like it's not to say that these tools don't have a place, but we like complexity. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry. I'm assuming like Snowflake is using Kubernetes under the hood to, move things around and orchestrate, and I'm glad they're doing it. But like, at my scale or most scale, say even with oil and gas, I don't think an operator should ever probably be doing their own Kubernetes, but even most of the software companies don't really need that, or offload it to a managed Kubernetes type service, like, and they can let AWS or Azure or someone else, handle that as well. But
yeah. No, I love it. So we have at least a few questions, so we can kind of jump into some of these. This one's a long one. It covers our faces perfect. All right. So data teams can be stretched pretty thin, given every org in the planet wants decision making to be data informed or data driven. Drawing lines, prioritizing, and having tough conversations becomes a needed skill. Any tips or tactics for controlling the avalanche? As an analyst, it wasn't an issue, but a manager, you become responsible for the spigot and avoiding burnout. Is this part of an analytics roadmap?
Yeah, so I think that's one where I do like, and again, we didn't use OKRs like we did at GME, but again, it's a goal setting framework. But I try to say even OKRs for our team, on a quarterly basis, monthly basis, and I think those are your North Star. That's what you always go back to. And like, if something that's being asked of your team doesn't align with what I understand, like the company's goals are, or like what I've set my team's goals, as, then we need to have a serious conversation about, does this need to be stack ranked? Where does this need to fit, in the priority list? Or like, I think that's the biggest thing about setting goals, or, set, your OKRs, whatever you want to call them, is like, it's a permission to say no. I think, if you don't have, any goals or objectives, then you're just at the whims of whatever someone asks. But if you have kind of like an actual plan and goals laid out that you're accountable for, then if something's going to pull you off that track, it needs to make sense, and then opens the door for a conversation there.
Yeah, no, that's a great kind of just add on there. Yeah, it is interesting how we very quickly can become, I feel like, just this ad hoc task taker of a team. So yeah. Let's see. Oh, okay. There was. This wasn't just a funny comment, so I'm just putting up. Someone said, "Hello here, hello manager here. I don't know what I'm doing." Meme.
Yeah, he definitely feels that way sometimes.
Yeah, I imagine it's always. Do you feel like some companies, it's just, and maybe you'll have to work in a few more places. Do you imagine that manager means different things in different places?
Yeah, definitely. Again, especially because again, we were, and I say smaller company, we, ended up being pretty large as far as like how much oil we produce, and grown to over 200 people, so a lot bigger than I like to think, but it felt small. But again, we wear a lot of hats here. Like, again, I have to do some individual contributor work, and I'm working across the business. Whereas, like, again, I think you get into a bigger company and it's a much more narrow focus. And I think again, I think you can go deeper. I think that's one thing here. Like, it's been very broad and and thin. But I think at other companies that you're a manager, you can go deeper and maybe really put more processes in place or focus on a certain aspect of the business and go deeper. And maybe if you're more in depth with that part of the business, then you can feel like you have a little more grasp. But it depends on what you like too, because I like the variety, and I like learning new things, and I'm okay with not knowing everything. But I think some people, if they're going to manage something, they really want to be the expert in it and understand it. So I think the size of the business and like just how narrow your focus is can really change what it means to be a manager.
Yeah. Let's see. So this is more of a tech question in terms of like what do you kind of like? So this person's asking, do you T plus Airflow plus Snowflake? What do you think will become the dominant standard?
I think they're all getting challenged at different levels right now. It seemed like Airflow has got some sticking power that again, I think you've seen like Mage and Dagster, and again, the race is there's still a lot of race to be run, but it seemed like it's really Airflow has become really really sticky, and something that people still revert to. Like, again, like I know some people doing pet projects messing around with Mage and Dagster, and not to say they're not adding value, but even I've got a buddy over at Astronomer, and I think they've got a lot of like the Airflow contributors working with them. But it's Airflow sitting in some large banks, and it's being used at scale at some really big companies now. Whereas like I think the other ones, I'm sure they're being used other places. But so I think Airflow has made itself pretty sticky. I really like DBT, but I think it sounds like with SQL Mesh and some of these other things coming along, like it's definitely going to get a run for its money. And it'll be interesting to see if they get absorbed by Snowflake or something like that. I really like Snowflake, and I think it's very quick and easy to use, and I think if you use right, you can do it affordably. We were looking at that or Databricks. Databricks just wasn't quite there, especially on that on the data warehousing side at that time, like say 2001. I think they made great strides. I think serverless is actually even just as recently as this past week has become like GA.
Yeah,
I think across different cloud services, like I really like what they're doing from the whole standpoint, and I think Snowflake and Databricks are converging on a very similar platform, but just from different directions.
Yeah.
But even I think with DuckDB and MotherDuck and stuff, I think it seems like, and it's been that way just over time. You had Oracle and SQL Server, and people were running warehouses out of that, and then Teradata. When I started 10 years ago at ConocoPhillips, it was a big deal that we moved onto Teradata. And then Redshift quickly moved that needle, and then like I think Snowflake and kind of took over as the dominant player in the data warehousing space. But so I feel like those are much less sticky in a way than other parts of the stack, I think.
I think it's an interesting way of noticing it, because there are definitely components that stick around longer, and I think data warehouses tend to be the one that feel like they get shifted pretty quickly. We just seem to go from one to another. There's mainstays. Like there are plenty of people still running their data warehouse on SQL Server. So many companies still running they're still, like, I run into them all the time. They're running SSAS, SQL Server, on-prem, and it works fine. So it's interesting how that still works. I'm curious how much data is stored in SQL servers everywhere. But I think it's interesting. Airflow, like you said, it's got weird sticking power. We know it's sharp edges. I think that's usually the biggest thing, is like, we kind of know how we're gonna get poked. So at least there's that, and it's very easy to get started. Hard to like maybe go beyond that, but it's very easy just to like spin up Airflow and have it working. So
I think the nice thing that I say, and I think it's because like Snowflake and all these warehouses, like that endpoint it's SQL, and again they all have their intricacies and they're different. But but again, say if you took DBT out of it and you were doing all your transformations in Airflow and dumping it into Snowflake, well, you're probably taking a data frame and using SQL Alchemy and plopping it in Snowflake. Well, if you decided Snowflake was too expensive and you want to use something else, I mean, you can pretty much you could plop it into Postgres or and or Redshift or probably Fabric or Databricks or whatever relatively easily. I mean, again, I feel like that part is really quite you can, it's a Lego piece that you can just swap out relatively easily, and especially even now, even though the SQL dialects are different, I mean, now they've got with AI and even just different tools people have built. I mean, I think you could refactor your SQL queries from one language to the next relatively quickly.
Yeah.
I think those data warehousing transformation or transition projects are way faster and easier now than they were 10, 20 years ago. It was a multi-million-dollar deal probably to go from SQL Server to Teradata. But I think now, like, it still could be, but I think it can be a lot easier to do.
Yes, it definitely. I do want to be mindful of time. It's 10 o'clock, so I want to make sure when you've got other things, I'm sure. But other than that, I really appreciate your time, Bobby. We got a lot of stuff covered. Hopefully, also thank you for everyone who's watching. But any final thoughts, Bobby, before we sign off?
No, just I love to meet new people and network virtually or in person. So if you're ever in Houston, let me know. I'd love to grab a coffee or lunch or whatever, and just don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whatever. Hopefully I can be a resource for people, and hopefully I can learn from everyone else here too.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bobby. And I'm gonna hit end stream.